So where are you from originally? I don't even know.
I was born and I grew up in Coconut Grove, Florida, which is just south of Miami. My mom had won a beauty pageant in Cincinnati, Ohio, and she's not too embarrassed about this anymore. She won this beauty pageant, and one of the things they gave her was a convertible car.
Oh, nice.
I think she was 17, something like that. They gave her a convertible car. So she goes up with all her friends. She hasn't said this, but I'm guessing they maybe had a few beers or something like that, and she crashed it. And it was like, long story short, it was kind of a crisis for her. She decided to run away from home. So she was going to Haiti. She had an intention of just showing up at the Peace Corps offices there. But when she got to Miami, they had canceled all flights. I guess Papa Doc Duvalier had come into power or something like that. And so she ended up in the apartment next to my dad. And so they met, and we lived in that little place. And then eventually they bought the church and the whole property across the street and opened a shop in the middle of Coconut Grove. And the church was called the Temple of Yoga. And it brought all these like religious and spiritual teachers, mostly from Asia.
Mm-hmm. Were they Buddhists or?
No, none of those people were Buddhists. The main guru that I remember that came through was a guy named Baba Haridas. Babaji for short, and he just died like 2 or 3 weeks ago in his 90s. He had taken a vow of silence for 50 years, so I had never heard him speak. He wrote on a chalkboard. And oh
my gosh,
the little hippie commune where I was born, my parents eventually split when I was 7. Most of that community migrated up to Santa Cruz from Miami. And that was the beginning of something called Mount Madonna Center, which is now a huge, thriving community at the top of the mountains there.
And that was started by your parents?
It was Babaji.
The roots.
Yeah, Babaji was the anchor, and now he's gone. And so, but it's a K through 12 school with an amazing volleyball team. There's a huge Hanuman temple up there that's attracting Hindus from hundreds of miles around. It's I think a very interesting place, and it's kind of a retreat center. So it's a little bit like Esalen or 1440. So you can go there for retreats and all kinds of other stuff.
Did you grow up around that?
I did. So I think this is just reflection and rationalization. I think when I walk up to a stranger, I assume they're my friend and they'll play with me, and even sometimes, offer them a hug, because that's what it was like when I was a kid. If I ran into anyone on the property, I was like, "You want to play?" And they would usually say yes. So I grew up. It was very much like a village vibe.
That's probably where you get your altruistic tendencies. Now that you say this, because we've talked about this and and how this is a big motivation for you. So that actually, I feel like that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well, I think for most people, I don't think it's just me. My experience is most people, even if they temporarily get misguided, I think one of the most fulfilling things for people is acting out of altruism, and they often feel pulled away from that by material necessities providing for themselves or their families. So I've always been interested in what are ways that we can get people back into integrity, so that they get to operate from those deeper values. They first of all maybe need to learn how to articulate those values in ways that really resonate for them, and then how do we create incentive systems that allow them to kind of rest there most of the time.
Yeah, and this is what we'll talk about, because we're going to talk about blockchain, distributed ledger technologies, and economics, but where your unique perspective comes from is from this underlying altruistic foundation, if you will.
I want... well, should we go back and should we talk more about how I ended up here, or should we dive into this topic? What do you think's better?
Well, let's finish up your background, sure, and then we can jump into this value of yours, because it sounds like it kind of fuels everything else that you do. It does,
absolutely. So after my parents separated, I lived there in Miami. I eventually I started college late. I moved out to Portland, Oregon, and I moved there I think when I was 18 or 19. I lived there for a little while, and it became clear I wanted to go to a liberal arts college. So I started my freshman year. I started at the age 20 at Bard College in the Northeast, north of New York City. And while I was there, I tried to study everything. In 4 years, I think I ended up with 5.5 years of credits.
Wow. Our term of the day is dilettante.
Dilettante, yeah.
Dilettante that I just
Dilettante,
learned,
yeah.
which means
Just somebody who, a generalist, somebody, a jack of all trades, master of none, somebody who's so interested in everything and not particularly enthusiastic about developing deep expertise. And that's definitely how I was in college. The 3 summers in between my 4 years, I studied in Germany, China, and France. And I would have taken Russian if I could have kept doing undergrad.
well, you could have.
Graduation to me felt like they're kicking me out.
Yeah.
Like, this is so great. And so I didn't know what to do. I think at that point, Bard College was per capita graduating more professors, like people who go on to grad school and become professors, than like any college in the country. So everyone I knew was going to grad school. So I was like, I don't want a real job. I'll go to grad school. So I ended up getting I got into Columbia under Bob Thurman. But I got a full ride under Jeffrey Hopkins at the University of Virginia. So I went there for a PhD in Buddhist studies and religious studies, which if I had finished that, I would have become a scholar I would have had to teach academically all the world's major religions, but I would have had deeper expertise in Buddhism.
Why didn't you?
I got there and I looked at, I don't want to name names. There were certain people there who were following that trajectory, and they just seemed like they were grinding it out. And I looked at all the career outcomes, and I had friends who were further along than me, top of your class at Yale, and they're like, it's like 100 interviews to get that one adjunct position for 20 grand or 30 grand a year in Oklahoma.
Wow.
It was very, very competitive. We put out a lot of PhDs, and when you're doing something that's essentially purely academic, the career options are super limited. So anyway, I dropped out. I went to New York City. I got a job in the art world. I worked there. I worked in Paris. And then in 2002, with a business partner, we opened an international art gallery in San Francisco. And I did that for 10 years.
What did you do in the arts?
So we had a private art gallery where we did exhibitions. We had 2 kind of parallel programs. We did sort of a strategic assessment and realized we speak a lot of languages and we've spent a lot of time overseas. So we can find major artists like of this level in India, and an artist of the same stature in the US won't even return our calls. But she will. And she's never had a commercial show in the States. So it's a lot more hassle, a lot more expense, but we'll give her first commercial show in the States.
Oh, wow.
And so we did a lot of that. So, our roster there was like 50-50 Americans, mostly California, and then abroad, from all these other countries. And then we had a second program, which was historical, which was women artists associated with surrealism. So the one that everyone knows is Frida Kahlo. We did have a few pieces by Carroll over the years, but the main ones we showed were like Leonora Carrington, Remedios Varo, Wolfgang Paulin. When World War II hit Europe and there was an exodus of artists, the majority, the ones that probably are most familiar to people, like Yves Tanguy or Magritte, often ended up in New York City, but a smaller contingent ended up in Mexico City. And the Surrealists loved Mexico. I mean, Andre Breton called it the Surrealist country par excellence. And so we realized that those artists their market value was much lower and their recognition was much lower. So we decided to focus on them and their estates, and we worked with their kids and stuff like that.
Great. And then how did you come out of that?
I came out of that in 2012. My business partner and I broke up, and I had a conversation with a good friend. And he was like, I was like worried about making a living. I didn't want another gallery. I knew that for sure. I had been on the board at YBCA, Urbana Center for the Arts, for 5 years. We had started a nonprofit called Epicenter Arts. And the most lucrative jobs kind of in the commercial art world, either you're the 1% of galleries that make a fortune or they're in the auction world. And it was tempting. And this friend of mine, who's a very successful business guy, said, if you take an auction job, you're going to be in this industry for the rest of your life. And I don't think you're happy here. And I'm really glad he said that, because it was mostly fear driving me deeper into the industry. And so I took a leap. I had a ton of friends that I had been really curious about in technology. And so I started working in the sort of technology ecosystem, very quickly figured out my happy place is startups. Giant companies have like an immune system, like their antibodies just, they get really curious about me and then they're like, no.
Why? Because, well, you're not a tech guy.
Initially I was selling myself as the marketing, branding, sales guy. But, I was really starting to pay attention to what lit me up. And bureaucracy kind of shuts me down. And but these little consulting gigs, it was a constant hustle. But I was learning about so many interesting things so quickly. And I loved the hubris of it, the thought that this tiny little inflection point could really transform things. And so, at this point, I've probably been an advisor or a consultant or a founding team member of, 40, 50 different things.
Startups?
Yeah, I'm just constantly involved in a lot of different stuff. It's had its ups and downs and...
it's a tumultuous. The entire nature of startups is
faster and faster,
right.
Boom and bust.
All over the place, messy.
Right. It's like you run to someone 6 months later, they're like, aren't you doing the alligator farm? Like, oh no, that ended 2 months ago. We were going to deliver alligators door to door. It just didn't play out.
The drones didn't...
the drones with the baby alligators.
They didn't work out.
We're going to, protect your yard. I have heard more ridiculous. I don't say yes to everything. So where did that go? So that go.
Yeah, I was going to say. So where have you found the sweet spot in this exploration for what motivates you? You've been in a lot of different industries. It sounds like. How did you find where you're at now?
Sweet spot. I like that. That's a good way to phrase it.
Are you stuck on the baby alligators?
No, we're biologically predisposed to look for pattern, right? We're pattern recognition machines, really. That's one of the most foundational elements of survival. And we're so good at it and we're so predisposed to pattern recognition that we will often see patterns when they're not even there. So I got really interested in that, and I was having all these fast little engagements, and I was looking for the pattern in where I was contributing the most and getting that feedback, and where I was learning the most and finding it the most fulfilling. And I would describe my sweet spot now as business altruists. They're people, to use a metaphor, they're people who see wealth as fuel, but it is absurd to be worshipful of the person who has 100 tankers of fuel and no beautiful rocket ship, right? And that's how I think of us culturally. We classic Calvinist Protestant stuff. If you're rich, it's proof that you're in favor with God, and if you're poor, you're out of favor with God. If you get into favor with God, God will make you rich. And that undercurrent in American culture is still very much there, even if you don't identify with any of those religions. So I think of people that I most admire, maybe they're able to generate some wealth, but it's always in service of an altruistic vehicle that they're going to fuel with it. And so those are the people where there's just deep and instant respect and admiration and a desire to collaborate. And if you feel that is reciprocal, which it isn't always, that is your biggest signal that this is a true business opportunity. I wish some mentor had said to me in my 20s. So when I was getting into my first business, what everyone said, who was older than me and who I admired, was, you have these skills and she has these skills. And look at the complementarity. It's very logical. It's very linear. And it's not that isn't valid, but experience has taught me that's not what's most important. If you have redundancy of domain expertise, but you leap out of bed for the same reasons in the morning, you're going to find the long haul, especially the tough parts, way easier, like way more fulfilling. And so that's the alignment that I look for now.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.